Okay, welcome to Energy Utilities and Telecommunications for Tuesday, March 23rd. First order of business is approval of the minutes from March 18th. Do I hear a motion to move that? Motion to approve the minutes. Representative Gartner. Second. Representative Delperdang. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Seeing none, minutes approved unanimously. Next up is presentations by Stanley Adams, Department of Commerce, Broadband CARES Act funding. Stanley, it's so good to talk to you again. I sure miss you here in person, but welcome to committee.
Thank you, sir. I apologize I couldn't be with you in person today. I really would like to do that, and hopefully next time it won't be a challenge for me. Let me just double check. You guys can hear me? Okay, great. So I just wanted to provide you an update today. So Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you and provide an update on what we've been up to in our broadband development office. As you undoubtedly know, much has happened in the year since the Broadband Expansion Task Force issued its final report. And I would like to commend you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Masterson, again, for your leadership in co-chairing that task force in tackling the wide range of issues related to broadband, expanding broadband for all Kansans. While the COVID-19 pandemic cut short the process last year, you will see that we were still able to accomplish a great deal in the intervening months to improve broadband access. The task force recommendations and the work of this committee in particular has helped to shape much of our work, and consistent with the executive order Governor Kelly signed last October, which formally established the Office of Broadband Development. But it was the pandemic which dominated our focus most of the past number of months. Throughout state government, as you all know, programs were established to mitigate the adverse effects or impacts of the coronavirus and support people in need. The broadband pandemic response plan that we proposed was approved by the SPARK committee, providing a total of $60 million to fund two programs, which I'll highlight for you now. The first program was called the Connectivity Emergency Response Grant Program, so SURGE for short. The SURGE program allocated $50 million and provided funding for infrastructure specifically. We established an online application and evaluation process to receive project proposals. The application process was very streamlined in order to rapidly get the projects approved and implemented. We prioritized applications, those applications which included a clear demonstrated need and a high level of community support and engagement for those projects. On the SURGE program, there were over 80 applications that we received, and we ended up making awards for 66 projects totaling $49.5 million. I'll pause here to just note that we actually had requested funds that was well over the $50 million that we had available, closer to $80 million in requests. And we think that number would have been higher, actually, but for the fact that there was a compressed timeline, which I'll touch on here in a sec. So the proposed projects were also required to provide at least 20% of the total project costs in the form of matching contributions. So that's the way we set that up. And then also just kind of how we set this program up, we provided 50% of the grant amount up front for most of the awardees. There were a couple of exceptions that we were able to work with the awardee. But our goal was to streamline the process as much as possible under the conditions that we had. In fact, that's one of the major challenges with the program was that these are infrastructure projects, but they needed to be completed and operational by December 30 to comply with the CARES Act requirements. So it's a handful of months and a lot of work had to go into getting those applications up and running. Those projects up and the applications done, and then get pushing the funding out. I want to mention another challenge that we faced on the practical side of things. You know, as we managed the projects, as I said, there were 66 projects. Part of our way we manage the projects, we schedule project status calls throughout the process. And sure enough, on more than a few occasions, we learned that there were projects that were facing the challenge of their crews being infected by the coronavirus. So it just brought home the point of our efforts and the reality of the challenge. All the more reason, all the more reason I wanted to take this opportunity again to thank those construction crews and all those involved in driving these projects to completion in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an active pandemic. That was, and you'd have to just be on the receiving end of the calls that we're on. They really did a great job under the circumstances over the last number of months. So then, and as I mentioned, so all of that, and then on December 27th, legislation came out of Washington that was enacted to allow for an extension of the CARES Act funded projects to be completed. So this 11th hour extension was helpful, but most of our projects were substantially completed by the December 30th deadline. And right now we're working through the project closeout calls with each awardee as they complete their project reporting, reconciling invoices, and so on, so that we can make final disbursements of the award amounts for all of those projects. Now, so the $50 million surge program was designed to address the infrastructure side of the accessibility equation. We also stood up a $10 million broadband partnership adoption grant program. Now, this program targeted support for low-income households to have internet services where they didn't have it. To support this program, to facilitate the program, to facilitate the program on an expedited timing, what we did is we relied heavily on school districts and the internet service provider community. The school districts were closest to knowing where the greatest needs were, and in many cases, it was the service providers who had existing programs and processes in place to be able to qualify households for the eligibility criteria to make sure we were directing resources to those truly in need. Both school districts and service providers were eligible to apply for the program, and we were able to provide funding to all of the eligible applicants, a total of 25 projects, which covered internet services and support for devices. I'll mention here of note, when we started out with this program, our initial thought was to just do to let the funds be applicable for internet services only. But we really worked hard to be responsive to the environment. We got a lot of feedback from school districts and from service providers that were stressing to us that devices was a real problem. And again, this is right in the heat of trying to figure out how everybody was going to be able to access the internet from home when they weren't used to that. So we modified the eligibility to include devices as well in some cases, and I think it made a big difference. Obviously, as part of our application evaluation process, we did not provide duplicative funding. There were, in some cases, school districts who had connectivity support from other federal programs. So our BPAG, or Broadband Partnership Adoption Grant Program, was structured to be complementary to those programs and fill the gap where it made sense. Let me pause right now. I just want to share if I can share my screen. I'm going to actually, can I share my screen? If I can, I'm going to show you the kind of geographical dispersion of the awards, where they were in the state. Just let me master the technology here. Okay, hopefully you are seeing a map of Kansas with some dots. So here
We see it.
Okay, good. So the blue dots are the surge or the infrastructure projects, the 66 that I talked about, and the yellow, you can see there, those are the broadband partnership adoption grant programs. Obviously, you can see here all over the state. We had some very significant projects over in the southwest part of the state where, and actually I should point out, we had a range of types of deployment, mostly fiber. We had a combination of fiber. We had fixed wireless projects that we supported. We really tried to stress to the, we had webinars prior to opening up the application process, and stress that we really were requesting proposals that met the immediate need, being completed by December 30, but also had staying power, long-term benefit. Immediate impact, long-term benefit is the way I've been trying to articulate this so that everybody understands we are really trying to not create a bunch of short-term projects only to have us discussing how do we fund another project in the exact same area in a matter of months or years, a short number of years. So I think we did a good job of that, striking that balance. I wanted, so good geographic dispersion was accomplished. And this what I'm showing to you here is available. We posted this on the website so you can see it. And we announced all of the awards in specific. You can click on any one of these to see what it is. But again, just a really great, we felt like it was a really good project, a good program with good results, and we're working through closing them out now, and I think we're in good shape so far. So those are the two programs.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes, sir.
We have a couple of questions, and I want to, if they're on target with what you're answering now, I'd like to ask them if they have. If not, we'll hold them to the end. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have one question that's relevant to this map, and then at a later time, I might have another inquiry if that's permissible. Mr. Adams, as I look at this, it doesn't look like that there's anything being done west of Garden City. We've got Goodland, we've got Tribune, Syracuse, Johnson City, Elkhart. Are those communities all well served, or is it just they're too close to the Colorado line to participate?
No, thank you for the question. So we were faced with a couple of challenges here. I didn't talk about all of my challenges. So limited funds is the first reason, but I think in particular, one of the other things that happened, remember what I was saying is one of the challenges was the compressed timeline. So it's possible that there certainly needs all up throughout the state actually, but what happens is because what service providers did is they took a look at their capabilities, right? What can we get done by December 30? Because that's the requirement, the federal requirement. And there were cases where there were projects that could be done, but they didn't submit them because they didn't believe they could, in good faith, get them done that quickly. And just the practical side of this is, even if they had, we had to set this up in something of a competitive way, right? The $50 million was sufficient to the bulk of the projects that we got were compelling, overwhelmingly compelling. We worked through a lot of issues. Tried to work really close with the service provider community. One of the takeaways was that we have to make sure going forward that we make sure everybody knows about it. We think we did a good job on the whole, but this map doesn't tell the whole story in terms of where there is necessarily need. This is where people identified areas that they could demonstrate need and that they wanted to do the projects. We didn't tell them these are the areas that you have to do.
So is there anything that I as a legislator need to be doing to make sure that Chairman Jennings' town gets high-speed internet there in Lakin? Or when you come back next year, will we see this system filled out all the way out to Colorado?
Well, funny thing. Can I answer your question by telling you about the next? I just got a little bit more of what I wanted to tell you about that gets at your question. If I can,
I'll be happy to wait as long as necessary, Mr. Chairman. I have a different question at a later time. Thank you.
Okay.
You had your hand up. Was that? Did you still have a question?
Say me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Okay. Did you have a question?
I don't, because Mr. Adams told me where I could find this map, and it's on the website, so I will not ask for him to bring it to me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I seen it up, and we have some technical difficulties occasionally, and I just did not want to cut you out. So,
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. Again, if you would care to continue.
Okay, great. So that the Representative Carmichael's question leads to the one other area I want to touch on briefly, which is the Broadband Acceleration Grant program that we established separate and apart from the the specifically allocated dollars from the CARES Act for a pandemic response. So in addition to the pandemic response grants that I just talked about, we also launched the first round of state-funded broadband infrastructure grants, like I said, called the Broadband Acceleration Grant Program. This program is part of a 10-year, $85 million investment made through a partnership with KDOT. The IKE Transportation Plan allocates $5 million per year for the first 3 years, and then $10 million a year for the remaining 7 for our office to administer projects for infrastructure, quite similar to the surge pandemic response program. There are some differences that I can highlight too, but generally it is focused on infrastructure in specific. So just as the $50 million surge program really illustrates on the map and the questions, right, there is significant work still to be done. So, and I just want to mention that this innovative funding partnership with KDOT allowed our office to more quickly launch this initial program as we continue to work to close the digital divide once and for all. So all of that, the answer to your question, Representative, is this is a 10-year program where on an annual basis, we can receive applications to do more to fill in the map, if you will, where there's clear need. So I think one thing that we always welcome is any help in raising awareness of the project, of the availability of the funding, and in the case of the broadband acceleration, the first round of the acceleration grant, like I said, was $5 million, and we had well over $5 million in requested funds. So we are in the middle of we just announced the awardees. Which I had on the map. I showed you that. Actually, I think I did. Yeah, I did. So the big difference you can tell right away. $5 million doesn't get you as far as $50 million. 66 projects, $50 million worth of projects, $49.5 million worth of projects, and then for our broadband acceleration grant, the $5 million got us a total of 10 projects across the state. So. We're making progress, I think is the way I would put it, and feel good about that. But this highlights, so these are highlights of what we've worked on to try to improve connectivity. But we recognize the importance of having a plan as we go forward. So I'm actively in the middle of developing a state broadband strategy. We've engaged the services of Boston Consulting Group and with O'Brien's to help us put down, take into account all of the things that we've talked about in committee and in the task force, and really kind of putting a laser focus on how do we ensure that all of these major use cases, if you will, whether it's education, healthcare, economic development, any of the other things that are critical for everyday living at this point, our state has a roadmap for how we want to drive that connectivity to meet the needs. And importantly, it's today, but it's also for the future. I mentioned earlier, we're trying to make sure that when we spend taxpayer dollars, that we're putting them we're deploying those investments in a way that we aren't repetitively investing over and over again in the same area, because it's already hard enough to reach these areas based on the private sector, solely private sector investments. Otherwise, they would probably be served already. So expect to hear more about our planning efforts. We're fully engaged in developing our stakeholder engagement implementation plan, which will make sure that we hear from a wide range of stakeholders, including yourselves, including the service provider community, as well as key end user constituencies, kind of the way I would call it, constituencies in healthcare, the community anchor institutions, education, and the like, public and private sector. So in closing, and I'm happy to take questions, of course, in closing, let me just share, I wanted to share an observation, right? As many of you know, Mr. Chairman, I have been advocating for robust broadband infrastructure and accessibility for the better part of the last decade here in Kansas. As we have worked through the nitty-gritty details of launching these programs that I just highlighted for you, I like to keep in mind that there are real people benefiting from these efforts. And our efforts are designed, as I mentioned, for lasting impact. So we are being responsive to the challenges of the pandemic, but we're also being responsive to meeting the needs of long-term economic growth and a great quality of life for all Kansans. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of a brief rundown of the major things that we've been working on. Again, I really do appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and like, as I said, I'm happy to take questions. I know there's a lot of things going on. So this is from a broadband development standpoint, what's going on and where we're at. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Schreiber, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Stanley, for the information. I was curious on the 85 million from KDOT for that 10-year program. Is that, and I don't know, maybe you don't have all the procedures set up yet, but would a project need to apply each year if they didn't get selected, say the first year? Does it carry over to succeeding years since this money's spread out over 10 years?
Great question. So the way we've set it up so far, and we get to revisit this each year, kind of to tweak and build off of lessons learned. So right now, the way it's set up, you need to apply. The projects that we are awarding need to be completed within 12 months. So you need to carve out a specific area that you can get built and operational within 12 months. And then you're still eligible, you are eligible to apply again for another area for the next round. So that's the way we've done it. It's a way to help us be able to manage the process and manage that we're getting results for the dollars invested, so that you can't just kind of have a rolling, it's in progress, it's in progress. We want to know that you complete. So for example, I pay close attention to applicants in the Broadband Acceleration Grant. I looked at, did they have a track record with us in the SURGE program, and how did that work? And actually it's been a side benefit of just really solidifying great partnerships with the private sector on that.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. Thank you.
Representative Gartner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really a couple of comments and a question. Number one, I think this really shows again that we can do pretty good work when we have a task force, the broadband task force, and this is the outcome that we've started now on expanding broadband. So task force sometimes work pretty well, and in this case they did. Hopefully we'll have one for an energy plan at some point in time. But the second comment I'm going to make, Stanley, is to you and your team. Receiving that Sparks money, the 50 million, and then turning that around. And we know broadband projects aren't easy. They don't get finished, completed in just a month or two. But indeed, that's what you all did. I mean, you had a very short window and had to have those projects completed by the end of December. So my hat's off to you and your team. My question is, under the American Rescue Plan that was just approved, is there money, additional money in that plan for broadband flowing back to the states? And do you have any idea if we're going to receive any of that money and how much?
Right. So great question. Thank you for that. There's a lot not known on that subject. I'm paying close attention, trying to keep abreast of it. Let me just mention first, I'm not doing justice to how much it's a team of two. There's me and we call it the team of Stanleys, Melinda Stanley and myself. And in addition to Kayla Savage, actually, we had the heavy burden of trying to lift all of these projects. And the service providers were really patient with us as we tried to turn this around. It was extremely aggressive timing for the type of projects that we had. So I do think that we've got to kind of, I don't know is the answer. We've got to wait for some federal guidance to come down for exactly how those funds are. I'm optimistic that we will be able to do more, as you saw on the map. And I tried to convey, there is a lot of work to be done, as Representative Carmichael said. We didn't solve the problem. List a lot of dots on the map, but it didn't solve the problem, right? And my phone rings quite a bit to prove that pretty much every day. So I'm optimistic. We're still kind of waiting to hear a little bit more guidance from the feds on how those funds can be deployed.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate you being here today too. Looking through this, you'd mentioned the $49.5 million and so forth for 66 projects that were awarded. But then when we get into the ITE program and so forth, so the first question is, how much has actually been, as far as checks written out, how much money has actually been spent versus awarded? Or is it the same in one?
On the Surge CARES Act funded projects you're asking?
Well, just all above. How much have we spent toward the project so far?
Well, we're in reverse order. We just announced the awards for the Broadband Acceleration Grant. So those are pending, doing the actual agreements with the awardees. So those haven't actually been dispersed. Those are pending. And then on the Surge and the BPAG, well, actually, all of the BPAC funds were pretty much all of, I think, not the exception, those were all funded up front. So those funds were dispersed. We are funded half of the grant funds on that 50 million. Half of that was dispersed on the front end. But what we did to protect ourselves to make sure projects were completed, we required that they finish the project and basically show us your receipts. So before we actually gave them the other half of the money.
Okay. And do you have a list for the committee members here as far as who the awardees or the grantees are?
Oops, wait a minute. I do have a list. I didn't have it up to share, but I can certainly submit a list. I think pretty easily that shows you.
Yeah, I was just saying if you could just email something over.
And what the project was.
Okay. And then when we originally started this, they were talking about bandwidth. Is it still, I think it was 25 meg, I think, up or down rather, but is that criteria still in there? Like a minimum amount of bandwidth?
Right. So on the speed, there are kind of two parts to the speed in this context. One is the 25 megabits per second down, 3 megabits per second up was the minimum threshold to be considered a served area. So you could apply for helping build out anything that was substandard or zero, less than 25.3. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, for your application to be competitive, and what we really strongly encourage is to propose projects that have higher than that speed, much higher speeds, right? So the 25.3 is compared to 1,000. 1,000 is the two-way gig service that is becoming increasingly commonplace. So what you can hear the consistency in the point, right? I'm really trying to drive long-term. It doesn't have to be future-proof, but that would be good. So we basically really encourage applicants to deliver proposed projects that will have staying power. And speed, that speed dimension is a piece of it. But we don't actually restrict any solution, any technology. It's what does that technology accomplish is what we try to think about.
Okay, and one more if I may, but earlier on, I think it was Representative Carmichael brought up when you had the map up, pretty much anything west of Garden City. But as we're moving forward with this, has any consideration been given to the Starlink project? I know I talked about it on February 22nd of 2018 in this committee, but because they're now actively deploying thousands. I think it's 3,200 satellites going to be up, and they've just changed their bandwidth to 300 megabit. It sounded like up and down with a 20 millisecond latency. So Does that play into this project at all, or is that something we wouldn't even consider?
So, boy, that's a really good question, right? So we are actively engaged on the subject. Number one, and they haven't applied for any funds, so I don't have any firsthand experience in that regard. I just want to point out one of the things that we're talking about is what is the role for these low Earth? What it is low Earth orbit satellites. It's an innovative approach that's different than the previous satellite solutions. And the promise is that it will provide a lot more capability than the previous satellite technologies. And I'm not the technical guy here, so there's a limit to how deep I can go on this. But I think the counsel and advice I'm getting from technical experts is along the lines of, we need to be cautious and make sure that it can perform what they say it's going to perform. So for example, if they're saying they can do 300 megabits per second off of the satellite, is that upload and download? I think it's not, but that's a question. And then the question is, I think, around, does it work when you scale up? Because right now it's a new technology being deployed. They're still launching satellites. So honestly, I'm a little skeptical of silver bullet solution promises, but if it works, then we will, and that's a part of our strategic roadmap, is to take into account those types of things. And we're discussing that to make sure we are being smart about how we want to go about solving this problem in a cost efficient manner. So
All right.
I don't know is my answer, but we're looking at it.
Yeah, I appreciate you diving into it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I greatly appreciate Representative Deplerdang's question, because it was my second question that I was contemplating. But first, Mr. Adams, I want you to understand, I'm very pleased with the progress that I see. If I look at the map you bring us today with where we were at in 2014 when I first came to the legislature, great progress has been made recently. And I'm sure that it's beginning to change people's lives. And so I certainly commend you for what you've accomplished. Now the however. Systems of low Earth orbit satellites like Starlink, and I suspect we'll see others coming online, work. I mean, right now, I'm sure they can't scale up to provide internet services all over the country. In fact, right now, it's principally the northern half of the northern hemisphere of North America, I guess it is. But for you not to know where this technology is going, and for you to tell us you're not really conversant with where it's going, causes me concern, because I have a fear that we are investing millions and billions of dollars building a hardwire network that is based on 20th century technology for use in a 21st century world. And all you need to do is go out and look on the electric pole in back of my house and see all of the abandoned technology that has been installed, some of which within even the past few years, because technology far outpaced what the planning was at the time those capital investments were made. Now, I also recognize that there are implementation problems, and that Starlink alone is certainly not a panacea and a cure. But why isn't more attention being given to low Earth orbit satellites? Why is it that we're investing all of our money in hardwire technology?
Okay, there we go. Great question. I hope I come across more clearly. I kind of sort of don't know is my answer. I kind of do know. The technology is not proven is the challenge here, right? There was a point not so long ago where there was a question about whether or not we needed to deploy fiber because it's an unproven technology. Well, we do have to make sure that we're being smart about what we invest in What my message is that we are open to, we're not being closed-minded to new technologies. What I'm only saying is, in that case in specific, they're in beta. It's not actually fully deployed right now. So and I'm telling you that it's on our radar as something to be evaluating and considering as part of the solution overall for our state. So I think it's a good news story. I'm a big proponent of there's not a single solution typically for things like this. And what I'm saying is that we're open to looking at it. It is just simply not, it's not a proven technology, obviously, if they're in beta testing. And there are some other challenges, but we're looking at them.
Yeah, certainly it's not only is it in beta, but it's also not even available in Kansas, or to the extent it is, it would be in the far northern tier and not with very much reliability. But I appreciate your answer, and I don't mean to be overly critical, but I am concerned about the volume of capital investment that we are making in a 20th century system. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Question. Representative Keither?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stanley, what was the news that was just released in McFarland? Was that part of, which part of grant program was this, or was it not? Because I think that's a success story that Jeff Wick was talking about in Wamego. So could you elaborate a little bit for me? Thank you.
Yes. So McFarland is where we it's the location of one of the surge connectivity emergency response grants that we deployed as part of the pandemic response. It was one of those 66 I talked about. What was interesting, and that was a project that was for WTC. Jeff Wick's Jeff Wick heads up that company. They built out a fiber to the premise solution in areas that did not have it in McFarland. And then on top of that, so they had that award. And I mentioned earlier that we felt really good about some of the partnerships that we're establishing and building with our service provider community. Well, that's a great example because WTC did a great job with, I think they had 2 projects under the surge pandemic response grants. And then they applied for and received another grant under the Broadband Acceleration Grant Program for a fiber solution in nearby Zendale, where we wanted to go to Zendale, but it's sparsely populated, right, which is a chronic issue generally, the type of places where we're looking at, but they don't have internet, so we couldn't have even live streamed it from there. So it's a really good example. It's a robust solution because it's a fiber build, which means we feel very comfortable that it's not going to be obsolete anytime soon. And that's according to all of the industry standards and norms. But again, just one of a whole lot of successful projects that we had on that we did on hurry up timing.
Well, I also think it speaks to the point and the need for right now. Fiber is the answer for now, for reliability purposes. And I certainly know as a member of the task force, we talked about a myriad of different ways to deliver this. And so Representative Carmichael, I appreciate your questions, but I think, you know, everything's on the radar that we can possibly have right now, I think, with what the discussions I've had. So, you know, things will change and everybody knows. So, but I thank you, Mr. Adams, for talking about McFarland. Thank you.
Senator Del Perdang.
Thank you for letting me ask another question here. On the SERG project, it looks like it was completed on December 30th. Just trying to find out, has the second half of the payments been made already?
Right. So that's a tedious process. We wanted to make sure we're going through the process, as I was mentioning. Most of the projects were completed on by December 30. Some weren't. Some actually did need extensions, and we tried to be very accommodating. As a rule, what we were is very accommodating, as long as it was reasonable. Once the extension was given. one of the things that we're seeing is making it take a lot longer than we had hoped to get all of the projects closed out was simply a practical side of we just asked these awardees to hurry up and get the construction done. And now it's kind of the administrative side where they are required to provide the documentation to make sure we're in compliance with the CARES Act rules and regulations. So we're just taking and what we're doing is just we established a process to have a closeout call to make sure that if there are any open issues, and we've got technical consultants who are helping us actually to manage that part of the equation. So once each of these projects have been closed out and we've got the documentation right, we disperse the other part of the award. Like I said, we dispersed the 50% to all of the awardees got half of the money up front.
Okay. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is, I've heard about a task force and that you've been involved in advocacy for a long while. Is there a map that shows areas prioritized as far as need in this area that you work against?
Well, that's my favorite question because the maps are a real challenge. So the answer is there's not a single map that gives you clarity of where the reality is on the ground. And that's not unique to Kansas at all. There are different maps, and we are working on trying to consolidate a way to combine service provider data with user data or speed tests, for example, to try to come up with a way that we can be a little bit more insightful for what the realities are. But the mapping, there's the FCC and the Congress have been debating what the right type of map will look like, and it's an active issue right now. And so I don't have a map that I can swear by or tell you to swear by. In general terms, you can, but for a whole bunch of technical reasons, when you get down to the granular level of addresses, which are served and not served, that's a really thorny subject. And let me offer this. May not directly answer your question, but it touches on the answer, right? So the answer is we don't have a perfect map. We kind of use a combination of maps. I wanted to just highlight one of the things that came up in our surge grant process. As I said, we did it in a hurry, right? There's no way around it. It was a pandemic. It is a pandemic, and we needed to try to get this stuff done. We had a deadline of December 30, so there was no room to design the perfect process. So we worked on that. And one of the points of feedback from the service provider community was a bit of frustration that we want to make sure that we're not investing where there's already service, right? Which maybe a map could help. And one of the points of feedback was that we acted on. We introduced for the broadband acceleration grant, we added a step in the process for a public comment period, right? So when we received the applications, rather than try to be the owner of the perfect map while we're not getting people connected, it's been kind of how we think about it. So rather than that, what we've done to try to mitigate the issue of the maps is to say, okay, here's all the applications. It's up there for public comment. So it gives everybody, the community and other service providers, the opportunity to say, hey, well, wait. We actually do serve that area, even though it doesn't show up on the map, right? And that seems to be working a lot better because we did receive feedback, and it allowed us to make a lot more informed decision around how to evaluate these applications that we received.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what struck me is, if we're ready for that next dollar and where it's best deployed, as you say. You mentioned that you're just now developing a strategy and doing some planning efforts. What is the goal or the desired output of that process?
Well, a couple of thoughts, right? One of them is to take a little bit strapped for resources, so I can't do all of the things that need to be done. in the fashion that makes sense. So what we're trying to do is have an approach that takes into consideration some of the very things we're talking about here today. What are the implications of low Earth or orbit satellites? How should the state look at maps relative to what the feds have? What are our service provider community partners saying that they need to protect us in order to deploy services that we feel comfortable and confident will make our state competitive into the future? The strategic roadmap is a little bit of an action plan. What types of initiatives, if any, do we need to be doing in specific, and how are we stacking up relative to other states? Are we prepared? And if we're not prepared, what are those specific things that we can be doing so that I can give you, that kind of answer that's a little bit more thoughtful because it's a part of a strategic plan that we've put together and everybody understands.
You got quick time for one more quick question because we got to move on for another presenter. Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will be quick. It's really another comment, basically. I agree totally with Representative Delperdang and Representative Carmichael, and I've always said we need to look at new technologies as we move forward. But I also want to point out that when we make those decisions, and this goes to Mr. Adams also, that when we look at different technologies, I think we also need to look at who's making the investment and what kind of investment is being made in the state versus going to a satellite company that provides maybe services, doesn't pay taxes, doesn't hire any employees. So I think we need a balance there just moving forward. I totally agree. There are some areas that satellite makes a lot of sense, but let's don't lose sight of what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Delperdang, real quick.
Yeah, if I could just respond, I'm also tracking the Starlink with intrigue because 300 meg for $99 versus $80 million deployments. It's a huge difference there, and it's taxpayer monies that we're up here supposed to be watching on. So I want to make sure the right things are being done.
Okay, seeing none. Stanley, I want to tell you it was a real honor and a pleasure working with you for 18 months on that broadband task force. You guys did a great job, and it's kind of neat that you get to see the fruition of our work that you've done and your ability to do a great job in what you're doing. And I'm very glad to have you on board for that project. Again, I commend you highly for what you did and stayed in there and got her done, buddy.
Thank you.
So I think if we could clap, we could give you a big hand. So, all right. Thank you for your presentation. I wish you could have been here in person because, you know, I always enjoy shaking your hand. Have a good day, my friend.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, next up, moving along here, we don't have about a half hour yet. Ed Cross with the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Producers Association on an energy update. Ed, welcome to committee. You could state your name and what you do.
Okay, there it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ed Cross, and I'm president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. My pleasure to be here today. Just some brief comments. I don't have any written testimony, just put this together this morning. So I just want to talk a little about, some of the energy issues that we've had, especially during the month of February when we saw all the challenges, and the challenges for the oil and gas industry were there too. As many, especially natural gas producers, ran into a lot of issues. Whenever you look at in Kansas, we had a number of wells that were natural gas wells that were shut down during that time period. The price that they were getting for their natural gas was not exorbitant. They were getting the $2.50 per MCF to $3 MCF for the gas in general in most cases. you know, a lot of times the gas wells in Kansas are small, marginal wells. And so the way that the gas doesn't freeze, but they have to pump the water off the well to get the gas because it's low pressure. So they have pumping units that are pumping the water off of the well so the gas can come out. You know, when you have rolling blackouts and stuff from electricity, that means those things go down and then they freeze up and you can't start those back up. So, or even if you know there's a rolling blackout and, you know, we're going to shut this electricity off for this many hours, or they just have to shut the wells down because when it's that cold, you can't just start it back up. You may have all kinds of lines break and everything else. So they have to shut several of those types of wells down. Whenever I talked to the KCC and I asked them, you know, how many wells were shut down, and the data I get, you know, there's 23,700 and plus natural gas wells in Kansas, and 19,500 of those are active right now. And so what they gave me was what was temporarily abandoned since January 28th of this year. There was 256 wells. Now, I don't know how much production was shut in, because the production data doesn't come in until 3 months after the production. So February's natural gas production won't be available to us until end of May or 1st of June. So I don't have the actual data there. So, you know, there were some producers too that have, I talked to one that also is invested in an ethanol plant. And so what they have, and I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, they have contracts for their gas. For those, they hedge their gas in the future so that they would know that they're going to get gas and they know what the price of it is. So they had contracts for these ethanol plants. These plants happen to be in Nebraska, but they would get that. So what they were able to do was they went ahead and shut down their ethanol plants and then took the gas that was contracted to them and resold it back on the market at the higher rate. So you know, but for the most part, the natural gas wells in Kansas were struggling. They would struggling to try to keep going, and then of course when they had to shut down, they just had to wait for the weather to warm up to do that. Whenever you look at you know, Texas and what happened there in Texas, you know, we see that they had a spike in demand, and the cold temperatures led to devastating blackouts. And when I think all of us have been aware of the EIA, the Energy Information Administration data that showed on the week of February 8th through the 16th that Texas wind power was down 93%, coal power was up 47%, natural gas power was up 450%. But that still wasn't enough to meet the demand for that. So, you know, but when you look at Alberta, Canada, at that same time period, they had a spike in demand during far colder temperatures than what we had, or even in Texas, but they had very little disruption. And the reason why is Alberta has a reliable grid with 43% coal and 49% natural gas. So whenever you look at here, what, you know, for our perspective, what the obvious lesson here is that whenever you subsidize and mandate unreliable sources like wind and solar energy that are often useless when you need them most, you do so, you need to be managing your reliable energy sources, which is the ones that provide base load like coal, natural gas, and nuclear. You know, so, you know, we know how to produce enough low-cost, reliable electricity in every situation. We need to build reliable power plants, including those with on-site fuel storage, such as coal and nuclear. But you need to place a premium on reliability and resilience. So what I wanted to do was look at just kind of in closing here. What we have is still working like everybody is researching all the way through this, and so what we have is at least some of the things that we're working on now, and as to what happened. You know, what we've got so far, and it's a work in progress, is that, you know, during that time period in February, the wind didn't blow, and many windmills were frozen and it wasn't available. Baseload gas and coal plants ramped up to try to fill the gap, but the gas plants didn't have fixed price gas contracts. As I said, some of our producers, like our ethanol plant, had a gas contract, so you can get a fixed price gas contract. So So whenever these gas plants were told by the Southwest Power Pool that they needed to operate, they were subject to high spot gas prices due to high gas demand. Spot prices meaning, you know, they're buying whatever the gas was on the market that day instead of hedging in the future and saying we need to get these gas contracts in the future at a fixed price. The grid in general did not prioritize gas facilities for non-interruption. And so although they were badly needed, some gas wells, gas plants and gas transmission compressor facilities didn't come online because of the lack of electricity, because of the electricity was out to them and they couldn't get those going. So the Southwest Power Pool grid has put too much emphasis on wind and solar power and not on base load preparedness. You know, so that's kind of the way that we look at that. So, you know, the crisis over the bad winter weather was due, in our opinion, because we didn't focus enough on building reliable power plants and infrastructure, but we're more obsessed with getting as much unreliable wind and solar as possible. And that's something that we all need to learn from that mistake. So, Mr. Chairman, that would conclude my comments. I would gladly stand for questions.
Well, I have one here for Representative Carmichael. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully, we might have time for two, but let me at least try the first one. I'm not going to address your testimony about the resiliency or the reliability of wind or solar or whatever. I mean, we can have that discussion. But when I saw natural gas prices shoot up 300% or more, I don't remember the exact numbers, and my family being royalty owners, I immediately thought that, gosh, Kansas royalty holders are going to be looking forward to a wonderful payday here in a month or two when all that high-priced gas shows up in our royalty checks. I'm afraid that's probably not what's going to happen. Can you address what, if any, impact that brief period of high prices that may have been caused by the trading floor involving BP or other reasons, will that do Kansas royalty owners any good in their royalty checks?
You know, Representative Carmichael, it's a good question. And, you know, that's something that researching more, because we need, you know, we have that question and I can't answer that question, was who got the windfall from all of that? Because the producers are not getting the windfall. As you said, with royalty checks, you know, a lot of them, you know, are getting their same price with oil, with their natural gas production. So the windfall is not on the production level. I don't know exactly where it's at, and you know, and that's something that we're continuing to research. As I say, this is an ongoing project, and I know many others are too, to try to find an answer to that. I don't have an answer to that right now, but as soon as I find some more information, I'll be glad to share that with you. And
yeah, Mr. Cross, I agree with you. It's a darn sad day when prices go up that high, but Kansas producers and royalty owners, we aren't going to see a dime of it. So frustrating. It's not your fault. It's just frustrating. And I'll save my other question for another day. Mr. Chairman, wouldn't do us any good. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Carmichael. Any other questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier in your talk, did you make the comment that in Texas, during the cold spell, the natural gas usage was up 450%?
Yes, that was EIA data. It was up 450%, and you know, in addition to the rise in coal production, but that still wasn't enough to meet the demand.
Because didn't we hear, Mr. Chairman, didn't we hear in a previous testimonies that down in Texas during the cold spell, natural gas was down to almost nothing?
It's very possible.
So, okay.
Go ahead, Representative Schreiber.
Were you talking about the load, or are you?
Not the dollar amounts or anything, but the natural.
So you're talking about the load that was being created for natural gas?
Yeah.
Yeah, not the production.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. The usage went up.
Okay. I thought we had some previous testimonies from a week or two back where it was next to nil during the cold spell.
I think you're talking about the generation. I would be my guess.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ed, I appreciate you coming to try and explain. I got a question because I got some constituents in some of the small towns. And,
Mr. Chairman, I have a
I
question.
don't know that they have what? Oh, Casey? Representative
Yes, sir.
Halverson.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. My question is with respect to the recent earthquake that is going on in Wichita. I understand that this is a problem with fracking. Are your members still are we going to see an increase in this particular practice in the near future? Because we have seen a lot of earthquakes in the last, couple of months now in Wichita, and it's actually causing some damages. And I just want to know if you can be able to comment on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. I know you have a hearing coming up on.
Yeah, Representative Halverson, I think Thursday we're having a discussion on the fracking and the oil business. I think this one here is basically listed as the energy updates, unless Mr. Cross would like to answer that. But Thursday will be where we'll actually be talking about that with the fracking and the earthquakes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I'll make a few comments because, you'll talk about it on Thursday, but fracking has actually nothing to do with any of those earthquakes or injection. That's a complete different operation than injection wells. And I think you'll hear Thursday that more details about some of the issues surrounding those earthquakes in Wichita.
Would that be okay with you, Representative Halverson?
Yeah, you said we're hearing that on Thursday. Is that correct? Is that my understanding?
Speak a little louder. I can barely hear you.
I'm saying you said we're hearing that particular hearing on Thursday. Is that my understanding?
Yes, we're talking about the earthquakes specifically to Wichita and everything that might be involved in it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, no, good question. That's what we're here for. But to go back to my question again, some of my small towns, and help us, maybe some of the committee members or others understand it, they have contracts with gas, but some of the towns don't have a contract, and so it was bought on that spot market for that time and charges, and that's why their rates are so high. How are they going to be able to handle that? Because I know one of our little towns, Partridge, I think, is one of them that had ridiculous monthly residential bills of like $2,000. Are they working on that? And how can we maybe keep that from happening again? Because you guys the producers, Representative Carmichael's question, where'd that money go and how did that go? Would you care to answer that since we're on this energy crunch here?
And we as producers we operate in a lot of co-op areas too. So we're unfortunately going to, many producers are going to face a lot of high electric bills too. Certainly buying the gas on the spot market is a way that, a lot of our guys would say, we should be just like they do. A lot of them sell their oil and their gas by hedging it, by getting, we're going to sell it for this much in the future, and you know what you're going to get for it. You can do the same thing with buying the gas in municipalities. Natural gas price has been low for so long. I know a lot of people would say, well, just buy it on the spot market because it's, natural gas isn't going up. But when you run emergencies like this, and it is, not just for businesses, but for individuals, the electric rates are very high and almost prohibitive in many cases. So the oil and natural gas industry is trying to get back online to try to help with the natural gas supply, but something I don't know the answer to all of that. I mean, we just had a webinar in our association with the Attorney General yesterday to talk about that. He doesn't have an answer to all of those things, but we were just expressing some of the concerns that also here that many people have with electric rates and what can be done. But it's something that is an ongoing that we're working to try to be a part of the solution.
And I'd look forward to visiting with you on that again so we can explain to our constituents. And that makes more sense because it's just like farming or anything. You can buy it and contract it out for months at a time, or when you're buying it on a daily basis, the difference is who gets that money. And I think Representative Carmichael was alluding to that too, I believe.
Yes, that's certainly contracting out and hedging and fixed price contracts is one of the ways to reduce your risk.
And that, in my books, had nothing to do with the oil and gas industry or the producers, right?
No, that would not.
That's
have
why I want to
do with the oil
clarify
and-
that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ed, for coming and trying to do that. I think there's nobody else up to talk about anything today on the energy deal. So I think this is all for the committee. Appreciate y'all coming. And then Thursday, we have updates on Wichita fracking or not fracking, earthquakes. Is that correct, Barbara? All right, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you.